Hello guys, my name is Lars Stender. I'm a writer from Denmark who specializes in fantasy and science fiction stories. Today I'm here to read from my fantasy book Mandigo and the Hellhounds, and it'll be chapter 21. If you want to know more about me as a person and my books, you're welcome to seek information at the link at the bottom of my Twitch. Not until early spring was Mandigo able to finally get up from his sickbed and resume his studies at Bloodstone. A lot had changed during the time he had been ill. The first change became apparent the first time he stepped outside since his encounter with Haswasal. 2 10-meter high poles had been raised in the middle of the courtyard. One was bare except for a spearhead and something that resembled tracks of blood on the very top. The other pole had a horizontal wheel mounted at the top. Mandigo noticed that there were a pair of Svorlocks sitting on the wheel. It looked as though they were picking some leftover scraps of blood or food. He was pondering over what the idea was behind the whole setup when he suddenly realized that the scraps of food resembled human bones that had been plucked. Mortero was standing right next to Mandigo, who was completely petrified at his discovery. His uncle placed his calloused hand on Mandigo's shoulder and squeezed it tightly. "Yes, Mandigo, that is the fate of those who betray my trust. Never again will Bromboor force you to fight unprepared against demons. I trust that you will never betray me, my dear nephew." Mortero escorted the deeply shaken Mandigo to the novice's common room in the East Tower and left him there to himself. "See you at dinner," he asserted before closing the door quietly behind him. Mandigo let out a deep sigh and gasped for breath, as his agonized lungs had convulsed when he saw Bromboor's remains on the wheel. There had been no mistaking Mortero's warning, and Mandigo now understood what the voice in the darkness had been referring to when it insisted that a life be taken in return for Haswasal's death. Mortero had sacrificed Bromboor, but Mandigo had a queasy suspicion that under different circumstances he would have been executed instead. But both the voice in the darkness and Mortero himself had said that Mandigo was important. That was, of course, nice to know, but it would have been even nicer if he had known why he was so important. In fact, he was more confused now than he had ever been in his life, a feeling which he had begun to escalate ever since Mortero had picked him up at his home in Oak Hill. Oak Hill. How he missed his family, or rather, his foster family, even Rolf, who was so annoying. Even though the years at the mill had been hard and often lonely, Mandigo now longed for the comforting sounds of the grinding mill wheel and the squeaking of the wooden beams as it turned. But most of all, he missed Greta and little Bellatrix. He pondered once more where they might be and whether Greta knew what had happened to him. Mandigo hobbled over to the window towards the south. His body had changed due to his sickness. The demon's corrosive tongue had left deep, disfiguring wounds across large areas of his body from his knees on up. The hamstrings on his right leg had grown sore and weak, and he dragged his leg when he walked. There was a constant pain in his muscles that penetrated from the lower part of his back down to the area in and around his scars. His face, which had not been protected in any way during the attack, was the most severely damaged. The left side of it and most of his forehead was extremely disfigured. Miraculously, Mandigo's eyesight had remained intact in both eyes, and Mortero's magic had been able to repair the scars from the worst wounds, but even a skilled magician has his limitations. The fragrances of spring met his face when he reached the window. However, only his right cheek was able to sense the breeze. His left cheek felt numb. Mandigo drew the hood on his frock back and stood for one moment next to the window, enjoying the sun's rays. There was still a lot of snow on the mountain tops surrounding Bloodstone, but here and there the first buds and flowers of spring had begun to peep forth in the mountain slopes, and there was a scent of wet earth awakening. The door to the dormitory opened, and Mandigo heard several footsteps outside that stopped rather abruptly. He slowly turned around. A soft chorus of surprise and horror could be heard. "Mandigo, you're back," Casper said. He was closely followed by Jasper, and they both approached Mandigo. Most of the other novices stayed in the background. Mandigo sensed their uneasiness. Some of them were obviously afraid of him. Mandigo took hold of Casper's and Jasper's outstretched hands. "It's good to see you both again," he said sincerely. "We tried to get permission to visit you, but Master wouldn't allow it," Casper and Jasper said all at once. "Well, I guess he wanted to make sure I would be well enough for it," Mandigo suggested, touched by his friend's devotion. "Or maybe didn't they want anyone to see you?" a voice from the door said. Mandigo looked up. Grimwald and his two followers, Tego and Alamut, had entered. Grimwald's lips were curled in a sneer, as usual. But when he tried to meet Mandigo's gaze, his eyes fluttered nervously for one brief moment that was not wasted on Mandigo. "Leave him in peace," Jasper said. Grimwald looked over the fat boy and lifted an eyebrow. "Is it me, or did I just hear a flea make a noise? You'd think I could do without speaking until it found something useful to say." And with those words, Grimwald lifted one of his hands and pointed at Jasper while mumbling an incantation. Jasper's lips were pressed together, and an expression of panic came over his face when he couldn't open his mouth again, even though he tried. He grunted and quivered, but he was unable to say a single word. He tried to separate his lips with his fingers, but managed only to scratch himself until he was bleeding. Grimwald and his friend started laughing, and Jasper looked helplessly over at Casper and Mandigo. "Let him go," Mandigo said. Grimwald now lifted his other eyebrow while gazing at Mandigo. "Listen! The monster can speak!" There was more laughter. Mandigo sensed in earnest how his anger began to boil within him. His anger, and something else. It was far more dangerous. It felt like a smoldering log deep within him that suddenly began to blaze, spreading a crackling, sizzling energy out to his limbs and up to his brain, where it danced like flighty flames in various sparkling colors. "I said, let him go," he repeated with a voice no longer recognized as his own. Grimwald let out another scornful laugh, only this time it was a bit more strained, and the other novices began stepping back towards the walls of the room, leaving Grimwald, Tego, and Alamut isolated in the middle of the room. At this point, Tego and Alamut had stopped laughing, too, and they were shifting their feet nervously. Grimwald's eyes turned into two tiny ice-blue slits. "Do you really intend to test your powers against me, you monster?" he hissed as he clenched and opened his fist interchangeably, as though in preparation for a demonstration of power. "Do you really dare to, you idiot? Think about how bad you are at controlling your powers. You totally overreacted against that demon, you know. It was your own fault that attacked you. If you had had better control over your so-called magical powers, nothing would ever have happened. It was sheer luck that none of us were killed. Your clumsiness and lack of control could have had fatal consequences. And who says it won't happen again next time you try using your magical powers? Who says it won't happen again now?" Grimwald's words cut through Mandigo's scars and soul like sharp knives. What if he was right? What if he really was dangerous to his surroundings? On the other hand, he couldn't just let Grimwald continue to torment Jasper. And yet, still he felt, against his will, how the power within him slowly died away, leaving an empty coldness in his bones, so that he never very nearly collapsed. "Well, goodness," Grimwald said as he seemingly backed down again. "If that fat ninny really means that much to you." And with that he looked over at Jasper and waved nonchalantly with his hands as he mumbled something or other. With a pop, Jasper's lips came apart, and he was once again able to speak. Grimwald took a step closer towards Mandigo. "If I were you, I'd keep a very low profile from now on. Aside from not having a decent grip on your powers, you're not exactly making a good impression. I'd be pretty serious thing if you started scaring your girls or your younger novices. They could end up getting a completely wrong impression of the work we're doing here at Bloodstone." End of chapter 21.
So, So now he tries again to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Pretty simple. And because of his good nature, Mandigo don't want to hurt people.
That's right.
We don't know it was him making any problem with the demon, or actually just make it disappear so it didn't make up dying. We have no idea what this is. So,
although we get an indication, this is only an indication, but we do get an indication in a former chapter in which Botero is speaking with the voice in the darkness.
Yeah.
That something happened through Mandigo.
Yeah.
At the session.
Yeah. That we definitely did.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when you have a Harry Potter. You never know what's going on. Dark magician.
Yeah.